The vote had barely finished when Ambassador Laura Bennett stood up without a word and walked straight out of the chamber, and that single silent action was about to shake the entire galaxy. I was sitting 2 rows behind her, a junior attaché named Daniel Whitfield, 26 years old, 3 weeks into my very first posting at the Galactic Council, and I did not yet understand that I was watching history happen in real time. The Council had just voted, 11 species against 1, to strip humanity of its claim over a region of space called the Kessa Corridor. The official reason given was that human population growth made us a long-term risk to regional stability. Everyone in that chamber knew the real reason had nothing to do with population, and everything to do with what humans had quietly been building inside that corridor for the last 6 years. Laura did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She simply picked up her tablet, looked once at the alien speaker who had called the vote, and left the chamber without saying a single word. I followed her out, because I did not know what else to do, and the moment we stepped into the hallway, my communicator buzzed with an emergency recall order. Every human diplomat, every trade officer, every research team, every ship, all of us, ordered home immediately. By the time I reached the embassy, the staff were already packing, not in a panic, not throwing things into boxes, but calm and organized, like people who had rehearsed this moment, even though none of us ever had. A senior aide named Nathan Ashby handed me a travel pass and told me to be on the next shuttle out of council space within the hour. I asked him why everything was happening so fast. He looked at me and said something I would remember for the rest of my life. He said humanity had spent 400 years asking the galaxy nicely for a seat at the table, and today, the galaxy had just shown us exactly how much that seat was worth. So today, he said, we stop asking. I did not understand what that meant yet, but the tone in his voice made my stomach tighten in a way it never had before. Within 6 hours, every human ship inside Council territory filed a routine flight plan and left. Every embassy powered down in the exact order the Council rulebook required for a normal, temporary closure. Every unpaid docking fee was settled. Every borrowed piece of equipment was returned. Nothing was broken. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was threatened. And then, silence. No messages, no demands, no warnings, no ships crossing any border, just quiet, spreading outward from human space like a held breath. I remember sitting in the shuttle seat, watching the Council station shrink behind us through the window, and thinking that this felt less like a retreat and more like a decision. I did not know how right that thought was. The shuttle ride home took 11 days, and for the first 6 of them, nobody spoke about what had happened. We all just sat with it, the way you sit with a bruise before you know how deep it goes. On the 7th day, one of the communication officers, a woman named Grace Holloway, pulled up an open frequency and let a few of us listen. What we heard was not human at all. It was a leaked transmission from a Tren species fleet officer, speaking in a panicked voice to someone off-channel. He was saying that humans had filed their departure paperwork properly, on time, with every fee paid, and that this was not what a defeated species does. He said a defeated species argues, threatens, begs, or attacks. He said what we were witnessing had no precedent in 4 centuries of contact. Grace turned off the feed and looked at all of us in that small cabin and said one sentence that stuck with me the entire trip home. She said, "They do not know what a quiet human is capable of, because they have never once seen one." That sentence followed me all the way to Earth. When I landed in Nairobi, the streets did not look like a planet preparing for war. People were going to work. Children were walking to school. My mother hugged me at the door and asked if I was hungry before she asked me anything about the council at all. It was strange, being home in a city so calm while somewhere far above us, an entire galaxy was holding its breath because of something my own government had done. 2 days later, I was called into a private debrief with a government analyst named Oliver Fairweather. He did not ask me about the vote. He asked me about mood, about body language, about how Laura Bennett looked when she walked out of that chamber. I told him she looked calm, almost relieved, like someone finally putting down something heavy she had been carrying for a long time. He nodded slowly, and told me that within the government, very few people actually understood what was happening either. He said the full picture was being kept inside a small circle for now, and that even he only had part of it. Over the following weeks, the news feeds began carrying more leaked transcripts from the other side, and each one painted the same picture. Fear, not of an attack, but of not knowing. A historian from a species called the Valith wrote an article that was translated and shared widely on Earth. She said that in 400 years of contact, humans had never once gone quiet under pressure. She said humans talked when they were losing. They talked when they were winning. They talked when silence would have clearly served them better. She said the single behavior nobody in the galaxy had ever recorded was a quiet human. And now, for the first time, an entire species had that behavior, and no data to explain it. That was the moment I finally understood why the silence terrified them more than any threat ever could have. Threats can be measured, silence cannot. Meanwhile, on Earth, something else was happening that most ordinary people had no idea about. I was eventually pulled from my embassy role and reassigned to a small liaison office connected to something called the KESA project, and it was there that I finally understood what all of this had really been about. 6 years earlier, a joint team of human scientists and engineers had begun building something deep inside the KESA corridor, far from council eyes, funded quietly through independent programs rather than official council budgets. The project was called the KESA Array, and its purpose had nothing to do with weapons or territory. For decades, ships of every species, human and alien alike, had been disappearing in that region of space, pulled apart by hidden gravitational disturbances that no sensor technology could detect in time. Entire colony convoys had vanished without warning. Families had lost loved ones with no explanation beyond a blank spot on a star chart. Human researchers had found a way to map these hidden anomalies in real time, using a network of deep space sensors strung across the corridor. It had taken 6 years, immense effort, and constant setbacks, but by the time of that council vote, the project was only 70 days from completion. The so-called dispute over population growth was never really about population at all. It was about control. 11 governments on the council wanted ownership of that corridor before the array went live, because whoever controlled it would control access to the safest, most valuable shipping lanes in the region. They did not want to ask humanity for a partnership. They wanted to simply take the ground the project sat on and call it their own. When I learned this, I finally understood the silence. It was not anger. It was not retreat. It was focus. While the entire galaxy speculated about human military buildups, secret weapons, and coming wars, our scientists were sitting in quiet control rooms, working double shifts, finishing calibration checks, running final tests, without a single distraction from outside noise. Every diplomatic channel we still could have used was being flooded by the same delegations trying to negotiate ownership of something they had not built and barely understood. So we simply stopped answering and used that silence to finish the work without interference. I spent the next several weeks working within the liaison office, cross-checking sensor data, preparing briefing documents, and watching, day by day, as the final stage of the array came together. There was a woman on the technical team named Claire Whitmore, one of the lead engineers, and she once told me something I have never forgotten. She said the galaxy had spent 400 years assuming that human silence meant human weakness, when in reality, silence was simply the sound humans make when they are finally being left alone long enough to finish something important. On the 79th day since Laura Bennett had walked out of that chamber, the KESA array came online. I was in the control room when it happened, watching screens fill with data streams that had never existed before, real-time positions of gravitational anomalies, stretching across 300 light-years of space, updating every few seconds, visible to any ship equipped to receive the signal. For the first time in recorded history, that region of space was no longer a blind spot. It was mapped, monitored, and safe. The government made one decision that surprised even people inside the project. Instead of restricting the data to human ships only, they made it available freely to every registered vessel in the region, regardless of species, regardless of standing, regardless of the vote that had triggered all of this in the first place. Laura Bennett was chosen to deliver the announcement personally, live, across every open channel the council used. I was not in the room when she gave it, but I watched it later, along with millions of others, and her voice was calm, steady, and completely without anger. She said the KESA array was now active, and that anomaly tracking data was being shared openly with every ship in the network, free of charge, without exception. She said the project had been built to stop people from dying in the dark, and that fact had not changed, just because certain governments had tried to take it before it was finished. She said humanity was not angry. Humanity had simply been busy. Then she said one final line before the transmission ended. She said, "We will see you at the next council session." The reaction across the galaxy was immediate and overwhelming. Ships that had been avoiding that region for decades began using it freely for the first time. Colony convoys that had once needed armed escorts through the corridor now moved safely, guided by the same data being broadcast to everyone equally. Governments that had voted against humanity only months earlier were suddenly forced to explain to their own citizens why they had tried to seize a project that ended up saving thousands of lives almost overnight. I remember sitting with my mother in our kitchen in Nairobi, watching footage of alien vessels moving safely through the corridor for the first time, and she laughed so hard she had to sit down on a chair. She said they panicked because we stopped talking for a little while to go finish saving their lives without asking anyone for permission first. I thought about that sentence for a long time afterward. For 400 years, the galaxy had understood humanity as the loud species, the eager species, the one that could not help but explain itself constantly, offer partnerships, propose research programs, and reach out even when it was not strategically wise to do so. Nobody had ever considered what would happen the one time humanity chose not to speak. When the next council session began, the chamber was noticeably different. Delegates who had once spoken with confident authority now chose their words far more carefully. Species that had barely acknowledged human representatives before suddenly requested private meetings, eager to understand how such an advanced piece of technology had been built so quietly, without council funding or oversight. Laura Bennett walked back into that chamber the same way she had walked out of it months earlier, calm, composed, and completely unshaken. This time, however, every single delegate in the room turned to look at her the moment she entered. I was there for that session, no longer just a junior attaché watching from the sidelines, but part of the technical briefing team explaining how the array functioned to representatives from species who, until recently, had barely bothered to learn our names. During a short break, an alien delegate from a species called the Orin approached me privately. He said his government wanted to understand something. He asked why, after everything that had happened, humanity still chose to share the array data freely instead of using it as leverage. I told him the truth as simply as I could. I said that the goal had never been leverage, it had been survival, for everyone traveling through that region, regardless of species. I said humanity had been quiet because we were focused, not because we were plotting revenge. He studied me for a long moment before saying that his species had spent months preparing for a war that never came, only to discover that what they had actually been afraid of was cooperation delivered without warning. That comment stayed with me long after the session ended. Over the following months, the shift in how the Council treated humanity became impossible to ignore. Trade proposals arrived faster. Diplomatic requests became more respectful in tone. Species that had once dismissed human input in technical discussions now actively sought it out. None of this happened because humanity had threatened anyone. It happened because, for the first time, the galaxy understood that human silence was not a sign of weakness or defeat. It was a sign of focus, patience, and the quiet confidence of a species that no longer felt the need to explain every decision before making it. I often think back to that first day, sitting in the observation gallery, watching Laura Bennett stand up and walk out without a single word. At the time, I thought I was witnessing a diplomatic embarrassment, a moment humanity would regret for years to come. Instead, I had been watching the beginning of something the galaxy would spend a long time trying to fully understand. Years later, when new attaches joined the embassy, eager and nervous just as I once had been, I would tell them the same thing Nathan Ashby had told me on that very first chaotic day. I would tell them that humanity had spent 400 years asking nicely for a seat at the table, and one single vote had taught the entire galaxy what happens when that species finally stops asking and simply gets to work. The Kessa array still runs today, quietly mapping the invisible dangers of that region of space, saving lives every single day without asking for recognition or reward. Most ships that pass safely through that corridor never even think about the tense months that led to its creation. But I remember the silence that followed that vote, the fear it created across a dozen worlds, and the calm, steady voice of Laura Bennett, explaining that humanity had never stopped caring about anyone. We had simply stopped waiting for permission to help. And somewhere out among the stars, in council chambers filled with species who once believed they understood humanity completely, that lesson remains, quiet and permanent, exactly the way we left it.